Welcome to the Health in the Park Health Fair. We're presenting a variety of speakers to enrich your lives. And our next speaker is Allison Greenwald. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me tell you a little about Allison. Allison is a licensed clinical social worker and specializes in working with her clients, children and adults, from a relationship-based perspective. Allison has worked in the field since 1993, receiving her Master's of Social Work from the University of Southern California in 2003. Allison started her career working in Chicago in a community mental health program, providing individual and family therapy to individuals mandated to counseling. And over the course of her career, Allison has worked with children and families in the foster care system, within hospital settings, focusing on managing chronic illness, adoption, high-risk pregnancy, neonatal intensive care, pediatrics, and psychiatry, and within community mental health agencies. Currently, Allison is in private practice at PHA Wellness, where her focus is in perinatal mental health, postpartum mood anxiety disorders, adolescence, parenting, interpersonal distress, anxiety, and depression. And now I'll let her take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to be talking about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, signs, symptoms, and self-care during the fourth trimester. And we're just going to start talking about myths, myths of parenthood, because I think these myths are typically what get us into trouble in terms of our thinking, and they're out there. We think them ourselves before we become parents. We feel them after, and they can lead us down a road of feeling very helpless, potentially hopeless, and like we're not doing a quote-unquote good job. As we know, parenting is we come from what works for one person doesn't always work for everybody else, and so there's no really such thing as a bad parent. First one, a good parent can do it all. Definitely not true. When you first become a parent, it's all so new, doesn't feel like how you expected or anticipated, and it's just sort of getting used to what it's like to be responsible for another human being. Definitely not doing it all. Getting in a shower is definitely seems to be a feat, and when we do that, that feels good. So, being a parent comes naturally. Again, another myth that can make us feel so terrible, especially when we think about what we think about parenting before we actually have a child. So when we're pregnant, we might think, oh, I love this baby already so much. This is going to just be easy. I have younger siblings. I've been a babysitter. I've worked at camps, but it's not the same thing once you become a parent yourself. And to expect it to feel natural is a setup. Another one is you'll love your baby at first sight. Again, not necessarily. And as we get into talking about what it means, what we consider the fourth trimester, we'll look more at that. Being a parent will fulfill my life's purpose. Again, sort of the conundrum or debate about if you can stay home and be a full-time parent. Should I stay home and be a full-time parent? If I want to go back to work or get a part-time job, does that make me a bad parent? And then, of course, good parents, and then fill in the blank, right? We also have a lot of preconceived notions about how we feed our babies, so whether it's breastfeeding or formula. And I think oftentimes women feel if they can't breastfeed, like there's something wrong with them or they're a failure. They can't give the baby what the baby needs, which is just not true. Another myth is if you seek help for your mental health, you might lose your kids. People are so afraid to talk about the struggle and so afraid to talk about having a hard time out of fear. And then the last one, if you are depressed, your baby might get depressed too. Again, not true. In fact, what we know is the first 3 months of life for a baby are the least important in terms of attachment. So I just want to let that sit, because I think we assume that the first beginning is the most important, and it's actually the least important. And then again, that also goes into the fourth trimester and why actually it would be great if we could be pregnant for a year. But we'll talk about that. Okay. So who's affected? Perinatal depression impacts between 21 and 25% of women and 10 to 14% of men. These numbers are actually low, definitely low. And again, we haven't been talking about men and perinatal depression until very recently, but they too suffer from it. And then when we were looking at talking about perinatal anxiety, prenatal prevalence is 13 to 21%, and the postpartum anxiety is estimated between 11 and 17%. And again, these numbers are low. We call perinatal mood and anxiety disorders PMADs, and they are the number one complication of childbirth. They are also very treatable. When thinking about prenatal risk and contributing factors, a history of PMS or PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or if you've had perinatal mood or anxiety disorder in the past, you're more likely to struggle the second time. It's not predetermined. It doesn't mean because you have a history of PMS that you're going to struggle, but it's good to keep that in mind. If there's a family history of mental health or chemical dependency concerns, if there are a lot of extreme social stressors in your life, relationship stress, unplanned pregnancy, teen pregnancy, it's hard enough having a baby when you're an adult, and it's a decision that you come by after lots of planning. It's that much harder as a teenager, and that doesn't only have to do with the fact that, you know, when you're a teenager, you're in just a different place in your life, but also our brain development. So as a teenager, your brain is, you're much more anxious and impulsive and feel as though you're the center of the universe, as you should be at that time in your life. So taking on caring for a baby is just very complicated. History of previous trauma, and type A personality. So high expectations of yourself in relation to birth and parenting, etc. So really hard to try to be perfect when you become a parent. It's a big setup for feeling like a failure because nobody's perfect, right? And there's a big learning curve. You know, no matter how old we are when we decide to have a child, we grow up with our kids. Doesn't matter what our age. There's nothing like it. You can't anticipate how it's going to feel or be, and it's always changing. Postpartum risk and contributing factors, traumatic birth, which is something that we don't talk about very often. Some people don't even realize they've been through a traumatic birthing process until they start telling their friends or talking about it to people in their community, and then someone might pause and say, wow, that sounds really traumatic. I think because after childbirth, if we have a healthy baby, we have this, again, another myth that, well, we should just be so grateful that we have this healthy baby. We shouldn't say anything about what happened before that, right? A history of loss, premature delivery or NICU involvement, trouble breastfeeding, that's a big one, having multiples, and then just the sleep disruption that definitely takes place, especially the first couple months of a baby's life. I just want to point out there's a difference between baby blues and PMADs. Baby blues impacts 50 to 80% of new moms. And again, I would argue that that number is higher. You know, after having a baby, just before you deliver a baby, your estrogen is at its highest. After having a baby, your estrogen plummets. And estrogen has been building over 9 months. After childbirth, it just tanks. And so if you can, imagine sort of how you felt, month to month, and then I don't even know what the number would be, quadruple that, even more than that, right? It's a very extreme shift in your physiology, and therefore leads to, lots of big emotional experiences and feelings. So tearfulness and reactivity, these are all signs of the baby blues. Baby blues peaks 3 to 5 days after delivery and usually doesn't last more than 2 weeks. So that's a big difference and something to just be aware of. Acute sleep deprivation and fatigue also come along with the baby blues. Whereas PMADs, again, affects 21 to 25% of women Signs and symptoms: sadness and crying, changes in appetite, sleep disruption, predominantly negative thoughts and emotions, irritability and anger, hopelessness, helplessness, guilt and shame, and suicidal thoughts. Now, when you look at that list, so much of what comes along with feeling that way is, again, this sense of guilt. I am a failure. I don't want to tell anyone. I'm terrified to tell anyone because if they know this, are they going to take my child? I don't even want my husband or partner to know. So that sort of gets in the way of us asking for help. But for both baby blues and PMADs, it's so important to talk to people close to you about how you're feeling, because no matter what, talking always makes us feel better. And to know that you are not alone in this, that so many people struggle from this. When looking at perinatal anxiety, signs and symptoms: agitation, inability to sit still, excessive concern about baby's or mom's own health, so really focusing on is something wrong, very heightened worry, feeling of being on high alert, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, racing thoughts, constant worry. And then physical symptoms can include racing heartbeat, shortness of breath, stomachache, headache, just sort of feeling out of sorts in your own body, which is hard to differentiate from how we feel anyway after delivering a baby. So kind of hard to know what's what there. Again, just because you have these or struggling with some of these doesn't necessarily mean you have a perinatal anxiety disorder. And it does mean it would be a good idea to get some help and to talk to somebody. What is the fourth trimester? Fourth trimester, baby's first 3 months of life outside of the womb. Mother's body and mind is recovering from childbirth and continuing to sustain baby. The family is adjusting to the new member. New family dynamics are beginning to develop. And having a baby changes us in ways we can't anticipate. And that's a universal experience across the board. So again, when babies are born, they would typically, or not typically, we would all be better served if the baby, if we carried babies for a total of a year, because when they come out at 9 months, they really aren't ready to be in the world. And this is why people often say, well, my newborn doesn't do anything. It doesn't, babies don't typically smile back at you or engage for 6 weeks. And so it really is about feeding and rocking and changing this baby, where you're not getting a lot back in return. And it's hard to read baby's signs and know. The only way they have to communicate is to cry, and they do a lot of that in the beginning. So it's very unsettling. Around 3-4 months, they change. And then we kind of start to feel like, I'm getting the hang of it. Maybe, not everybody, and that's fine too. There's no shame in that. But I think for many people, there's this sort of shift that happens after the first 4 months. So what do we do? What do we do during these first 3 to 4 months to manage as best we can? So some tips for the fourth trimester. We use an acronym, NURTURE, and so I'll just go through each letter and talk about what each means. So the N is for nutrition, ongoing importance of prioritizing mom's meals. A mother often, her self-care goes out the window, and feeding herself becomes the bottom of her priority list, and it actually needs to be the first thing, right? Again, your body just went through all of these changes, and you need nutrition. You need fat for your brain, you need carbohydrates for energy, you need protein, you need food. So super important to prioritize your meals, doing meal planning, anything fast and easy, double batching, freezing. That to me already sounds overwhelming right now. So when I say all that, I mean, ask people around you and in your community, if you have them, to cook for you, to bring you food. If people did nothing else but that, you would be off to a good start. Have ready to eat items on hand, fruits, vegetables, whatever is easy to pick up and eat. Don't worry about losing baby weight at this time. Your exhaustion may inhibit your appetite, so eat a few bites from different food groups every 2 hours, whether you're hungry or not. Just a few bites can make a huge difference. So the U is understanding your baby, what to expect. There is a period of newborn crying that will peak around 6 weeks. During this time, a newborn might cry 2+ hours a day. So again, this is not set in stone, and this is what's typical. Remembering that they have no other way to communicate to you but to cry. So ways to promote infant sleep and reduce crying. There's something called the 5 S's by a pediatrician called Harvey Karp came up with this, and he has a lot of good books out there about this process. But essentially it's swaddling, stomach side position, shushing, swinging, and then sucking on a pacifier. He takes you through in his book. He also has videos on how to do this, and it can be really, really helpful. Of course, you should always talk to your pediatrician. Swaddling kind of comes in and goes out in what pediatricians recommend. But nonetheless, this has been really helpful to lots of parents. Carrying an infant 3 hours a day has been shown to reduce crying and fussiness by 43%. Again, that sounds like a lot. Okay, so now I have to carry my baby 3 hours a day. How am I going to do that? There are so many carriers out there on the market. You can find them secondhand. People give them away. Target carries a bunch of different ones. Putting a baby in a carrier and trying to get some stuff done in your life can feel really good. And if it's in your arms that the baby only likes to be for the first couple months because they are so small, that's fine too. Ask for help. Can you hold my baby? I know sometimes when we're struggling, especially if we are struggling with anxiety, we are afraid to let other people hold our baby, but we have to take that chance. And these are people in your community that love you and care about you and want to be helpful and often don't know how. This is a good way for them to be helpful to you. Mindfulness techniques are helpful to get through this stage. Using guided imagery, taking a lot of deep breaths. Remember, your physiology is kind of all over the place right now. So taking deep breaths is a really good way to reset, to connect to the present moment, to get your thoughts together. Whether you're sitting or walking, mindfulness, just again, connecting right now in this moment, this is what's happening, and I'm okay. Can feel very reassuring. Oftentimes, especially when we become parents, we're forecasting into the future, and that is incredibly anxiety provoking. Or we're looking back at what's happened. Oh, he didn't sleep or she didn't sleep last night, so she's not going to sleep tonight. Not helpful. Our brain's naturally going to do that. That's okay. But as much as we can anchor ourselves in the present moment by using some breathing and mindfulness techniques, the better off we're going to be and the better we're going to feel. And again, there are lots of resources on YouTube and online that are free, and there are apps as well to practice some of this. Dream feeding before you go to bed also is something that can really work, whether by bottle or breast. Again, something you can talk to your pediatrician about. More activity and stimulation during the day. So babies often come out confused, right, between day and night. So keeping them up more during the day, and with the adage, never wake a sleeping baby. That's definitely true. But as much as you can keep them awake during the day and having them sleep at night, obviously really helps. And then reduce association between night waking and feeding. So if your baby needs to eat every 2 hours, that's okay. But if they don't, and they can go 3 or 4, then potentially trying to rock them or use a pacifier if you're okay with that, to try to soothe them, give them a transitional object, introduce something that's safe, to try to put off the feeding part as long as possible. And then lengthen time before feeding with walking, diapering, other things that you can do. And then understanding your baby continued. So there's a lot of debate out there between breastfeeding, bottle feeding, formula feeding. They're all good, right? The important thing is that your baby is fed. A good idea is to line up resources for help ahead of time, signing up for breastfeeding classes or lactation consultants. La Leche League is a really good resource. There's also bottlebabies.org. Every person's situation is different. Not all women and not all babies can breastfeed. You deserve the right to choose whatever works for you without feeling guilt or shame or embarrassment. So again, the important thing is that your baby is fed. And then the R is rest and sleep. A vicious cycle can develop between mom and baby or dad and baby, where the infant has a sleep problem and then mom isn't sleeping, and then more likely to develop a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. It doesn't mean you're going to, but again, Poor sleep is really hard on the body and the mind. The cycle goes the other way as well. 4 to 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep lowers brain cortisol levels and equals restorative sleep. When you have a newborn in your home, 4 to 5 hours might feel and seem like a lot to shoot for. Again, this is where you ask for help. Even taking some naps throughout the day is going to be helpful. But if you can get 4 to 5 solid hours of sleep, you're going to feel a lot better a lot sooner. There are studies that show that severe sleep deprivation can cause psychosis. Not to scare anybody. Alma has a really good book called Sleep Spotlight that you can get there at Alma. So there are also lots of other good books, but that's a good one. There's a big difference between visitors and helpers. Strategies to guide new families in setting boundaries to get what you need and want from family and friends, such as setting time limits, having a time frame, a signal to your partner if you have one for when you're tired, and ways to dispense tasks. We often have a hard time asking for help. This is especially true after having a baby. Again, another one of those myths, I shouldn't need help. Everybody needs help. You know, women and men used to have babies in communities of people and tribes of people. We no longer do that. And so it's that much more important to be able to ask. Again, people want to help, they just don't know what to do or how to be helpful. And I just read something the other day, someone asking, when can we come over to help? And then the response was 2 a.m. would be great, right? So that would be one way. And you know, maybe you have some friends or family members that are willing to do that, but any help, all help is helpful, especially when it comes to rest and sleep. And new parents may likely need help to meet sleep needs. So whether that's pumping or bottle feeding or using formula to supplement, again, there's no shame in any of this, right? All you're trying to do at this age and stage is to recover from delivery and to bond with your baby as best you can to take care of your own needs and the baby's needs as well. And I should say, actually, that all of this also goes for adopting a newborn baby as well. So I want to point that out. And then T, time for self. Time for self goes out the window. Super important. If your oxygen mask isn't on, you can't breathe, right? So what does time for self mean? Play and exercise stimulates the reward centers of the brain and helps us to do the following. Relax, stay fit, think more clearly, make better decisions, act more creatively, feel more confident. 15 minutes, 10 minutes makes a huge difference. Getting outside in nature, even when it's freezing cold, bundling yourself up, bundling the baby up if the baby's coming with you, really change of scenery can feel so much better. And oftentimes after having a baby, we can feel isolated and alone. Just getting out and taking a walk will change your mood. Acknowledging the loss of your old life to make way for the new is a sign of health. Missing autonomy doesn't mean you don't love your baby. So you can love your baby and want autonomy. Both things can be true. U is unite as a couple. Having a baby often changes your relationship if you are in one with your partner. Decreased satisfaction with your partner means you need to focus on increasing stability in the relationship. So we all feel very topsy-turvy at this stage, and it's really important to communicate. Start by fostering realistic expectations with one another. You're going to have new roles. The division of household labor is going to feel very different. And lots of women who struggle with this perfectionistic thinking feel as though they need to do it all themselves or that their way is the only way. And that is just not true. It's really important at the beginning to accept help and to work with your partner so that you can sleep or you can eat or you can take a walk or you can see your friends. And same for your partner. It goes both ways. Expect decreased sleep, energy, and patience. That's sort of just what comes along with becoming a new parent. Talk about intimacy after baby. So it's hard sometimes to just talk about basic stuff. Talking about intimacy can feel incredibly hard. It's also very important. And last but not least, say what's on your mind. Just say it out loud. You will feel better no matter what the outcome. Parents have a new developmental task of finding a new normal. It takes a while. Don't feel badly about that. And then resources for emotional support. Anxiety and depression are the most common complications of childbirth and pregnancy. The sooner they're recognized and treated, the shorter the course of illness. There's a website, postpartumprogress.com. There's an article on there, Symptoms in Plain Mama English, which is a really great resource to look at. Expand social network. So it's important to develop a community of social support, which is a protective factor against depression. It's also important to find enough of the right kind of support. So if you join a new mom support group, for example, and you don't feel well supported, leave. Find a new one. That might sound exhausting and overwhelming, and there is a community out there for you. It's important to feel safe, it's important to feel comfortable, it's important to feel like you can be authentic and yourself so that you can get the support that you need. And just know that we all need support and help. Guilt and fear, people feel guilty, they feel afraid for asking for help. Again, that's a universal feeling that we all go through. There's no need to feel afraid and there's no need to feel guilty. Sometimes it's hard to ask for help or to expand your social network because it doesn't feel good to step out of your social comfort zone, and it's also hard to set limits. Tips for getting support: define your needs and ask for specific help. I know I've said this a couple times, but I can't repeat it enough. People often don't know what to do. If you can tell them, it's super helpful. And if you don't know, you can say, I don't know. That's okay too. Sign up for a new mom's class, seek out healthy relationships, sign up for a health club with childcare if it's affordable, or walking moms groups. More and more, there are more resources out there for you. And then just some local resources. The Postpartum Counseling Center, and this is the website. We have multiple locations around the Twin Cities. Pregnancy and Postpartum Support Minnesota is an online support option. It's great. You can call the number here and or text, and someone will respond to you within 24 hours. They will link you to help in the community, and they also have peer support there where they can hook you up with somebody who's been through something similar, and they have a closed Facebook group for parents as well. HCMC Mother's Hope line as well. And then online national resources. Postpartum Support International is another really good resource. They publicize, talks in the community and just a lot of really good resources on their website. Postpartum Progress, Postpartum Dads, and Postpartum Men. Newer and really great that they exist. The other thing I just want to say is that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders encompass more than just anxiety and depression, but today I just wanted to narrow in on those two as they are the most common.